How does a country, well, project its influence and navigate all the complexities of our interconnected world today?
It's a huge question.
Yeah, and today we're diving deep into Tanzania's recently updated foreign policy. This document, it's essentially their roadmap, right, for how they engage with the global community.
Exactly. We're taking a really close look at the Tanzania Foreign Policy 2001 edition 2024.
Hmm.
It's straight from their Ministry of Foreign Affairs and East African Cooperation. And we're thinking about what it means, looking ahead to, say, May 2025.
Right.
Our goal here is really to pull out the core insights from this official policy document.
Yeah, forget trying to sift through dense government reports yourself.
Hmm?
We're kind of on a mission here to give you a clear and hopefully engaging understanding of Tanzania's international strategy.
Mhm.
We'll be unpacking the fundamental principles, what guides their actions, the successes they've actually achieved, the ongoing challenges they're still facing, and importantly, the key new areas they're focusing on now.
So where should we kick things off?
Let's start right at the beginning with the foundations. What are the core beliefs, the fundamental ideas that really underpin Tanzania's foreign policy? What shapes their whole approach?
Okay, let's unpack that. At its heart, the policy really emphasizes non-alignment.
Meaning they don't just automatically pick sides with the big global powers.
Precisely. And there's this deep, long-standing commitment to Pan-Africanism, that core idea of African unity and solidarity. Plus, a strong historical thread of supporting liberation movements.
Okay.
Beyond that, you see priorities like equality and how they deal with other nations, aiming for mutual benefit and partnerships, and a fundamental respect for human dignity and human rights.
What's really fascinating, I think, is the history behind these principles. You mentioned the policy itself looks back to things like the Arusha Declaration of 1967.
Yes, and even an earlier presidential circular from 1964. The Arusha Declaration, especially with its focus on socialism and self-reliance, that really laid the groundwork. It shaped their initial foreign relations in a big way.
Right. And this 2001 policy, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was clearly a response to those major global shifts happening back in the 80s.
Absolutely. Things like, well, globalization, the increasing interconnectedness,
Mhm.
the rise of market economies,
Hmm.
the growing importance of regional cooperation within Africa itself,
Yeah.
and, crucially, a conscious move away from just relying on aid towards building real trade and economic partnerships.
And it's interesting how the 2024 update continues to grapple with today's big issues. The document specifically mentions things like climate change, right?
Yeah, climate change, rapid technological advancements, the unfortunate reality of internal conflicts still happening in various regions, and that growing problem of cross-border crime.
So these are clearly major factors shaping how they see the world right now.
Definitely. It shows a policy rooted in core values, but one that's clearly had to adapt and continues to adapt to a changing world.
Okay, so we understand the foundations. Now let's look at the impact.
Hmm?
What has this policy actually achieved in practice since 2001? What are some of the key successes?
Well, one really significant area has been strengthening their relationships with individual countries, what we call bilateral relations.
Right.
The policy outlines how Tanzania has actively used things like cooperation agreements, appointing honorary consuls, and setting up these joint commissions for cooperation, or JPCS, JCCs, with a whole range of nations.
And we're talking about countries across different continents here. South
Right.
Africa, Angola, but also India, Brazil, France, even Vietnam. That's quite a network.
It really is. And it's not just about, signing papers. Tanzania's also been very active in promoting tourism and trade through events.
Like Tanzania, the Royal Tour in 2022, that got some attention.
It certainly did. And exhibitions in places like Dubai and Japan, too.
Mhm.
Even smaller things like a Tanzania Week in neighboring Kenya show that focus on practical collaboration.
Something that struck me was the specific economic agreements, like those double taxation agreements with South Africa and India.
Hmm.
For our listeners, these are really practical tools, aren't they? They encourage investment by stopping companies getting taxed twice on the same profit.
Exactly. They remove a key barrier. And the numbers seem to back it up. The policy mentions over 460 investment projects just from China between 2015 and 2020.
Creating over 50,000 jobs, that's significant.
Very significant. So moving beyond those one-on-one country relationships, Tanzania has also put a lot of effort into boosting regional integration, working closely with neighbors in specific blocks.
Like the East African community, the EAC, that's a big one.
A very big one.
Yeah.
The EAC aims for much closer economic and political ties among its members, and Tanzania has been central to establishing things like the customs union.
Which means basically free movement of goods with common tariffs for outside countries.
Yes. And then the common market, which expands that free movement to services, labor, and capital. They even have this, well, ambitious goal for a single currency by 2031.
Wow, ambitious is right.
Plus, Tanzania has played a role in mediating conflicts in the region, and they've actively pushed for Kiswahili to be used more within EAC institutions.
Okay, so EAC is key. What about Southern Africa?
Then there's their strong commitment to the Southern African Development Community, or SADC. Tanzania is involved in a really broad range of SADC initiatives.
Like what specifically?
Peace and security, good governance, industrial development, market integration, infrastructure, food security, also gender equality, youth development. And they participate in regional peacekeeping training through bodies like SAMI.
And didn't they achieve something significant with language in SADC too?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
A major win was getting Kiswahili recognized as the fourth official working language of SADC back in 2019. That was largely due to Tanzania's leadership.
Interesting. And they're also involved in the Indian Ocean region.
That's right, through the Indian Ocean Rim Association, or IOEA. They participate in programs focused on maritime safety, promoting the sustainable use of ocean resources, the blue economy, and tackling critical issues like climate change and environmental protection in that really important maritime space.
So they're active in multiple overlapping regional groups. How do they manage that? Does it get complicated?
It can. And the policy acknowledges that challenge, which we can touch on later. But they're strong supporters of things like the COMESA ECT tripartite cooperation.
Which tries to link up the efforts of those three big economic blocks.
Exactly, to harmonize their integration programs. This all feeds into the bigger goals of the African Union and, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA.
Right.
And you see practical benefits, like the creation of one-stop border posts, these really streamlined customs and immigration, making trade and movement much smoother. It's about making regional integration work better on the ground.
So it sounds like they're not just passive members, they're actively trying to make these regional bodies more effective for the whole continent. What about cooperation beyond Africa on the wider international stage?
Well, Tanzania has consistently contributed troops and personnel to UN peacekeeping missions across the globe.
Whereabouts?
Places like Lebanon, Abyei, Sudan, Darfur, South Sudan, the DRC, the Central African Republic. It shows a real commitment to international peace and security efforts.
And that recognition of July 7th as World Kiswahili Language Day, that was a big diplomatic achievement too, wasn't it?
A huge achievement, yes, largely thanks to Tanzania's advocacy. And they actively participate in global negotiations, particularly through the Group of 77 in China, making sure the voices of developing nations are heard on key issues.
Their engagement with the UN system seems quite deep.
It is. They played a key role in establishing the UN Resident Coordinator System that aims to make UN development work more effective in individual countries.
Okay.
And they've held numerous leadership positions in important UN bodies over the years, a seat on the Security Council, membership in the Economic and Social Council, things like that.
And didn't they host a major international tribunal?
Yes. Crucially, they hosted the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the ICTR, in Arusha for 2 decades, from 1995 to 2015. That was a massive contribution to international justice.
Yeah.
And they continue to host other key international and regional institutions like the African Court on Human and People's Rights. It really cements Arusha and Tanzania as a hub for international cooperation.
It paints a picture of a nation really engaged on multiple levels, from its immediate neighborhood right up to the global institutions. And this all ties back to their economic goals, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Promoting economic diplomacy has been a central pillar, really, of the 2001 policy and continues to be.
How so?
Tanzania has worked hard to keep its traditional export markets, like in Europe, through the EU's Everything But Arms scheme and the U.S. via AGA,
Right.
while also actively going out and developing new markets across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East.
And the economic data you mentioned earlier showed real growth in exports and foreign investment over that period.
Exactly. The policy document highlights the jump in export value from around $1.8 billion in 2001 to over $11.6 billion in 2022. And foreign direct investment, FDI, more than doubled in that time, too.
And that translates into real benefits for people, right? Jobs, skills.
Absolutely. Increased job creation. The policy cites figures showing growth there. Plus opportunities for things like scholarships, getting access to new technology, and valuable skills exchange. It's clear this multifaceted economic engagement is a top priority.
Okay, so a lot of successes to point to, but, no policy operates in a vacuum or without hitting bumps in the road. What have been some of the main challenges Tanzania's faced in actually implementing this 2001 policy?
Well, one persistent challenge, highlighted in the policy itself, is cross-border crime.
What kind of crime are we talking about?
Things like human trafficking, smuggling of illegal goods, wildlife products, arms, drugs, money laundering, and also the growing threat from cybercrime. These activities really hinder efforts towards regional integration and cooperation.
That makes sense. It's hard to build trust and facilitate legitimate trade if your borders are porous to illicit activities.
Exactly. And the policy notes that instability in neighboring countries can unfortunately fuel these illegal markets. Tanzania has taken steps like signing extradition treaties and sharing intelligence, but it remains a significant hurdle.
Oh, what else?
Another big challenge identified is the lack of social, economic, and political stability in some partner countries, and just generally in the wider global environment.
So, problems elsewhere directly affect Tanzania's foreign policy.
Yes, instability, whether it's weakened democracy, high unemployment, poverty, conflict in other nations, it creates a tougher external environment for Tanzania to operate in and makes it harder to seize opportunities. It really underlines how interconnected things are.
Right. Are there challenges related more to the policy process itself?
Yes, the document points to difficulties in ratifying treaties and protocols that have already been signed.
So they agree to something internationally, but making it law back home takes time.
It can. The policy explains that the need for thorough stakeholder engagement, which is important, often leads to delays. Examples given include the EAC Double Taxation Agreement and the SADC Protocol on Trade and Services.
And these delays mean the benefits like smoother trade or investment are also delayed.
Precisely. It slows things down. The updated policy does recognize the need to try and streamline this ratification process.
You mentioned earlier that Tanzania is part of several regional groups. Does that create challenges too?
It can, yes. The issue of overlapping membership, being part of the EAC, SADC, IORA, and others, means managing potentially conflicting obligations and also bearing the associated costs.
Like different rules for customs and different blocks.
Exactly. Implementing different customs union rules or timelines can be tricky. Again, initiatives like the Kumekucha IEAC Tripartite Agreement and AFCFTA are partly aimed at addressing this complexity and creating more coherence.
Now, this point about Kiswahili was interesting. You said it's underutilized in diplomacy.
Yes, the policy highlights this sort of paradox. Kiswahili is huge, millions of speakers, recognized officially by the AU, EFP, SADC, UNESCO, even declared a World Language Day for it.
Taught in universities worldwide.
It has massive reach and cultural weight. Yet the policy suggests it's not being used as much as it could be in actual international negotiations or professional diplomatic discussions.
Why do you think that is?
The policy doesn't delve deep into the why, but it clearly states that its economic potential isn't being fully tapped in line with its significance. The updated policy puts a new emphasis on actively promoting its use in international affairs and leveraging its economic value.
What about the nuts and bolts of implementing the policy within the Tanzanian government itself? Any coordination issues?
Well, the document outlines the governmental structure for managing foreign relations, but it does acknowledge coordination challenges between different ministries and agencies.
Meaning sometimes things fall through the cracks.
Potentially, yes. It suggests some policy actions haven't been fully implemented because of these coordination gaps. So there's a recognized need for stronger collaboration among all the players involved.
And finally, what about resources? Funding foreign policy isn't cheap.
No, it isn't. And securing the necessary resources is another challenge mentioned. While Tanzania benefits from aid, loans, debt relief, technical help, etc., the policy notes that international financing can be unpredictable. Partner priorities shift, criteria change. This can lead to funding shortages or delays.
So they need a broader approach to resources.
Yes. The updated policy stresses looking beyond just financial aid. It highlights the need to better mobilize non-financial resources too, things like developing human capital, attracting technology transfer.
Okay, so building on all that experience, the good and the bad, the updated policy brings in some key new areas of focus. What are these emerging priorities?
A really significant one is the environment and climate change. It gets much more prominence.
How so?
The policy details the impacts Tanzania is already facing: more frequent droughts, stronger winds, unpredictable rains, severe floods, sea level rise. It's clearly seen as a major threat across society and the economy.
And while they have national policies and have signed international agreements,
They're facing challenges, according to the policy, in accessing the international climate finance and the technology needed to really tackle these issues effectively.
So the new policy pushes for more engagement there.
Absolutely. Stronger engagement in international environmental forums to advocate for Tanzania's needs and improve access to those crucial resources and technologies.
Another key new focus you mentioned is the diaspora. Tanzanians living abroad.
Yes, there's a much clearer recognition of the diaspora as a key potential driver of socioeconomic development back home.
Okay.
A dedicated diaspora department exists, but the policy notes a lack of a really strong outward-facing framework to engage this community effectively. So the update aims to create that clearer policy.
What might that involve?
Facilitating greater participation, perhaps considering special rights or privileges for Tanzanians of origin who are now citizens elsewhere. It's about actively bringing them into the development picture.
And economic diplomacy, that's being reinforced too?
Definitely reinforced and expanded.
Yeah.
Using international relations to push economic interests, tracking tech, finding markets, getting FDI, securing aid, boosting tourism, creating jobs, it remains absolutely central, maybe even more so.
But with a focus on better implementation.
Yes, bridging gaps between the existing economic diplomacy department and other sectors, making sure embassies abroad are proactively hunting for those economic opportunities.
The policy also talks about human rights and good governance. Is that a new focus or reaffirmation?
More of a strong reaffirmation and integration. The commitment is already there in the Constitution and through ratifying international agreements like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the African Charter. The policy highlights the national mechanisms like the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance and the space for civil society to report on issues. It's about embedding these principles firmly within their foreign policy actions.
And finally, there's a strategic focus on gender and youth.
Yes, this is highlighted much more explicitly now. Given Tanzania's large youth population and the basic need for gender equality for development, these are framed as strategic priorities.
Why link them specifically to foreign policy?
Because these issues, gender equality, youth empowerment, are increasingly important in international cooperation. The policy says Tanzania needs to integrate these considerations into all its partnerships, bilateral, regional, and international.
Okay, so before we wrap up, can you just briefly sketch out the overall framework the policy presents? The vision, mission?
Sure. The vision is stated clearly: a secure, competitive, and prosperous Tanzania. The mission is about enabling and promoting development, economic, social, political, through effective diplomacy. And the overall goal, as we've discussed, is advancing Tanzania's national interests through international cooperation. The document then lays out specific objectives for all the areas we've touched on. It reiterates those fundamental guiding principles and briefly outlines the legal basis treaties, national laws, and the institutional framework, mentioning the roles of different ministries, the private sector, academia, the diaspora, media, NGOs, and development partners. It maps out who needs to be involved.
Right. So having taken this pretty deep dive, what are your main takeaways? What really stands out about Tanzania's updated foreign policy?
For me, it's that clear sense of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's built on consistent core principles, non-alignment, Pan-Africanism, but it's obviously adapting to a very different world than 2001.
Yeah.
You see a solid record of achievements, especially regionally and internationally, but there's also a candidness about the challenges that remain and a clear look forward, identifying new priorities like climate change, the diaspora, really doubling down on economic diplomacy.
And for you, listening in, I hope this has given you that quick but still thorough insight into Tanzania's strategy on the world stage. Hopefully some aha moments in understanding how they approach things.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought for you to chew on. Given this renewed focus on economic diplomacy, combined with Tanzania's really rich cultural heritage, especially Kiswahili, its growing global language, how could they maybe leverage those elements even more strategically?
Yeah.
To boost their global influence and strengthen partnerships in the years ahead?
That's a great question. That interplay between culture, language, economic power, how does it all fit together on the world stage?
Exactly. Something to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Tanzania's updated foreign policy. If you are interested in digging into the original document or have more questions, feel free to reach out.